I started watching those sessions at the beginning of COVID, and I would send Rachel. She would send out her English translations of the poems, and I would always send her my suggested additions to the edits to the translations. So I eventually became part of the translation team, along with another woman from the West Coast, Heather Silverman, and so what happened was the poems that we started, we were doing the classical poems of Jewish literature. But when October 7th came, Rachel turned to the poetry that she saw being created following October 7th. And she was doing just that. Around March, we were approached by a publisher who said, "Oh, I hear you're doing these poems of October 7th and translating them. I'd love to publish a book." And we said, "Great." So we started working with the publisher. At some point, we got a note from the publisher. And I'm just going to read this because it's fascinating. He says, and by the way, the book itself is like this. It's got the Hebrew on one side and the English on the other side of all the poems. I realize I got blur on, so you can't really see it too clearly. But in any event, he writes this. The idea of doing facing pages in English and Hebrew was a nice one in principle, but in practice, it turns out to be ungainly. It will not only cause problems with typesetting, layout, proofreading, etc., but also presumes there's an American audience that really wants and can read Hebrew originals. This is just not necessary, so we've decided to drop it. This is a work of translation. There's no call for a bilingual edition. So he fired us, we fired him. We found somebody else to help us with the typesetting. We self-published on Amazon. And I'm happy to report that notwithstanding his pessimism, we've sold over 6,000 copies. You can get it on Amazon if you haven't already. And the price is $15, but $6 of that goes to the Israel Trauma Coalition. And so we're sending $30,000 so far to the Israel Trauma Coalition, which has just made this an extra special project, which I was very happy to be involved with. So talking about the poems, this group, all of us were around when September 11th happened. I don't remember an outpouring of poetry following September 11th. But there was an outpouring of poetry following October 7th. And I think it's fair to say that this is something Jewish. This is what we do after some kind of tragedy. After the temples were destroyed, we had the Book of Lamentations. It was poetry. During the Crusades, there were poems written about communities that were destroyed. During the Khmelnytsky problems, we had also poetry came out of that. Following the pogroms in Ukraine, we also had poetry come out of that. So, and of course, after the Shoah. So it's not exceptional that this happens. Maybe it's just a Jewish thing. And one of the reasons is, right after October 7th, what were people saying where they were saying, "Ein milim," there are no words. But we found that words could be said often in poetry that were harder to convey in prose. Poetry has a way of expressing emotion and going beyond just the words themselves. So that's really what this book is all about. And I want to start by just picking a selection of poems and reading them with you, and maybe getting comments if you have them. So I'm going to share my screen here. And hopefully you can see this. So what we have here is the first poem in the book. And because we have limited time, I'm not going to read all the poems in Hebrew, but maybe for this one, we'll make an exception. So this poem is written by Tzur Goeta. Tzur Goeta told us that he's a poet, but he's also a scribe. So poem is Choshech al Pnei Tehom. Hamora Michal sha'ala otanu, mikan yodea lomar li, ma perush hapasuk v'ha'aretz hayta tohu vavohu v'choshech al Pnei Tehom. Kol hashanim ha'ele me'az v'ad hayom, hidhada ota sheila b'tochi, הדהדו בי עיני המורה המחפשות אצבע מונפת, הדהדה בי אותה השתיקה הגורפת. ב7 באוקטובר הדהד צלצול הטלפון, בביתה הדומם של המורה מיכל. זה אני אמרתי, הנה התוהו ובוהו, הנה החושך, הנה התהום. Shalom. Okay, so this is the poem. My teacher Michal once asked us, who can tell me the meaning of the verse, the earth was chaos and confusion with darkness over the surface of the abyss? Of course, that's a verse right at the beginning of the Torah. One of the significances of this poem and its placement in this book is, of course, that October 7th was Simchat Torah. So the opening chapters of the book of Bereshit, of Genesis, were being read that morning, where this verse occurs. So the teacher's asking, what is the meaning of that verse, of those terms? All these years, from then to this very day, that question has echoed within me. The teacher's eyes, as she was looking for a raised hand, echoed in me. The all-encompassing silence echoed in me. On October 7th, the ringing telephone echoed in the silent home of my teacher, Michal. It's me, I said. Here's your chaos and confusion. Here's your darkness. Here's your abyss. Goodbye. So let me say just a few words about the poem itself. Obviously, so students in Israel start learning these verses from the Torah in second grade. So this is a second grader who's learning this and really hears these terms, tohu vavohu, chaos, confusion. What does it mean? And obviously a child at that point doesn't know. As an adult, we understand the terms, but we also understand that was before creation. When creation happened, we expected the order of the universe to take place and things not to be chaotic and confused. There was nature. Nature had its rules. Things were predictable, expectable. And all of a sudden on October 7th, there's a realization that there's no more guarantee that things will be the same. There's no more guarantee that there's no chaos and confusion, that there's no darkness. And this particular poem, by the way, a number of people have read this in different ways, and I'll just tell you the way I understand this poem. When we read that the ringing telephone echoed in the silent home of my teacher, my understanding of this is that the student called up the teacher, and maybe the teacher was in Be'eri or someplace, but the teacher was dead, and the phone kept ringing, and she left a message. And I know that on October 7th, there was a lot of people calling and just leaving messages. Other people don't see that in the poem, but at least we can talk about that in a minute, but that's the way I see it. One of the things I'd like to mention here is the use of the phrase echoed. It appears multiple times in here, these echoes. And it's interesting, in Hebrew, the word for echo, you can see it at the top here, hidhed, echo, the word hidhed has an echo within it. It's what we call onomatopoeia. It's actually, echo has an echo in it. That doesn't come across in the English. That raises a whole nother question that we can talk about from time to time here, which is the whole exercise of translation. Chaim Nachman Bialik, who was the sort of father of modern Jewish poetry, famously said that if you translating the Torah or the Tanakh is like kissing a bride through a veil. And that's true generally of a lot of poetry. You can't just translate. You're always interpreting and you're always missing a little bit. So here we miss the impact of the Hebrew word for echo. The other thing that's an interesting translation question is the very last word in the poem. The student at the end says, here's your chaos and confusion, so on. And a translator could translate that shalom, or goodbye, or peace. So we were translators, we have that dilemma. We went with goodbye. We went with goodbye because we thought it had more of a finality to it. But I could imagine if any of you were translating this poem, you might have handled it another way. But let's, I don't know if there are any questions about the poem, the translation, your reactions to it, my reading of it. You can use your digital hand to raise your hand or otherwise yell out or whatever you want to do. Ruth Kaplan, yes.
Just a comment. I think it's interesting that the poet, when he's calling the teacher, says, "It's me." I mean, uh, it's like, I mean, if you think about it, teachers have hundreds of students, and so does this imply that had been an ongoing relationship, or I don't know. It's just very touching in a way that they don't identify themselves.
Yes, it could also be read, it's me, I'm the chaos and confusion here. This is what I'm experiencing.
Hmm.
I don't know, but it's a good point. Any other thoughts? Okay. Okay, so here's our next poem. And so the title of this poem is Strong as Death, and it's by Shlomit Naim Naor. So here's another translation challenge. Strong as Death, as you can see down here in the footnote, the title of this poem is a reference to the Song of Songs. Love is as strong as death. It's Azah Hamavet Hava. And so the Hebrew word for strong, Azah, is also the Hebrew word for Gaza. Now, in Hebrew, one of them is pronounced Azah and the other is pronounced Azah, but it's close enough. So you could interpret Azah Hamavet as strong as death, or Azah is like death. What we did as translators is we entitled the poem Strong as Death. It ends with the same phrase, and so at the end we translated it Gaza is like death. But let me read this poem for you. There's no point in sleep. Images surface. There's no point in waking. The visions are real. The moment before rising, I know nothing of the horrors of war. Every night I hold something in my hand that slips and shatters. Glass shards of reality scratch my face. Teardrops of dawn. God is hiding in a cellar, bereft of prayer, trembling for his deeds. His whole being is a scream. Slashed women are running towards me, holding headless babies, a flock of hanging ravens. Gaza is like death. So this poem starts out with the concept that there's no point in sleeping or waking. You try to sleep and you have nightmares. When you wake, the nightmares turn out to be real. The only moment where a person doesn't always think about the horrors of war is just one brief moment before waking up. Other than that, the images, and we're now far enough away from October 7th in so many ways, but at the same time, we know that the impact of October 7th continues at so many levels. And so I would imagine that a lot of this, which was true in the days right after October 7th, still has some truth to it, that it's all around us and it's hard, whether you're asleep or you're awake, what happened is there. And then we have these very powerful, gripping images, the glass shards of reality scratching my face, teardrops of dawn. And then this next paragraph is really fascinating. And we'll see, this isn't the only poem we're going to read that takes God to task. God is hiding in a cellar, bereft of prayer, trembling for his deeds. His whole being is a scream. The Hebrew is Elohim mistater b'martef. God is hiding in a cellar. There's a concept that it goes back to the Bible, and it's in the Talmud, and it's in the liturgy called Hester Panim, which is God hiding God's face. Very often people say That's how they explain the Holocaust. God was hiding his face. Here, God is hiding. Why is God hiding? And God is bereft of prayer, and nobody's praying because nothing's happening. God is trembling for his deeds. So the author is saying God has some responsibility here for what God either did do or what God failed to do. And God's whole being is a scream. We'll see this image of a scream come up in some later poems too, but almost the only reaction that people could have to October 7th was a scream. I went back to Ein Milim. That's the initial reaction, was just some emotional outcry because none of it made any sense. And this poem ends with an image, an ugly image, and we read about the Bebas twins even over a year later, and we still have these images before us. So Gaza is like death. Questions, comments, reactions?
Michael? Hi, Parrots, Rodman. Good to see you.
Parrots, how are you?
Okay, reading these in Yerushalayim on a very, very difficult day. I think that the line there is even starker. A couple of things that are starker than your translation even. That God is nir'ad mima asav isn't just trembling for his deeds, trembling at in response to his deeds. God sees what God's done and trembles, which is shocking. And although resisei dimot shachrit resisim in Deuteronomy 32 has to do with drops, and so you've got teardrops, resisim are also the shattered fragments of things. So it's even more graphic and horrific than comes through in the translation, I think. That's not a criticism, it's an observation.
No, Parrots, thank you. So Parrots, I can tell everybody is a very fine reader of Hebrew text and brings all of the background to it, and certainly highlights the limits of translation. And I can tell you, even so, there were three of us working on these translations. This is a work by committee, and we didn't always agree. We have some members of the committee push towards more literal translation, remaining faithful to the Hebrew text. Other people say we should remain faithful to the English text and try to convey the meaning. One of the things we didn't do is try for poetry, for rhyme or meter. And we could have done that, and a lot of translators do that. But we really felt here that we wanted people to understand the Hebrew as best as possible. And again, that's why it was very important for us to have the bilingual translation. And but again, those challenges. I mean, any one of these poems, you could probably footnote it with a dozen footnotes with both some reference to biblical text where these words are used and how it resonates because of that. And that's one of the reasons, especially, that I think Hebrew of all languages is hard to translate, because every word brings along with it resonances from the Bible or rabbinic literature. So Parrots, if you see any more of those coming along, don't hesitate to jump in. Any other comments about this? Yeah, Terry.
Yeah, what struck me was I'm not a poet, I don't write poetry, but the people who wrote these, did it give them a release? Did it give them some kind of, feeling of how to deal with this issue? What were they going through? What was running through their heads and when they were writing? And, was it just a brain dump? I don't know, but I think they were very brave to write these things.
Yes, some of it was bravery. Some of these people couldn't help but write the poems. Sally?
Thank you. I want to respond to Parrots because I think your translation is even better than the Hebrew in the previous poem. When the Hebrew is Hinei atov vavohu, and you turn it into you add the word your chaos and confusion, which is a little angrier than just quoting the verse. I think it's wonderful.
Well, I want to give full credit to the actual Hebrew poet because We actually discussed some of these translations with the poet, and that poet said that there should be a sense of attitude there. And I'm not sure if without that help we would have done that, but I really think it adds to it that she's finally saying, she's saying, you know, I finally get it. I get it. Now what I, you know, but thank you for raising that comment. Anything else?
Thank you.
Okay, this next poem, called Kaddish, is by Asaf Gur. So Asaf Gur, besides being a poet, is a journalist. He was a journalist on radio, TV in Israel. And you'll see that comes up in the course of this poem. And I'll just read the whole poem, unless we have somebody else that wants to read. Give my voice a break. Would somebody want to read? If not, I'll do it. Seeing no volunteers. Okay. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, and no one came. Many thousands called to him on Shabbat morning, crying his name out loud, tearfully begging him just to come. But he had ceased from all his work. No God arrived, and no God provided comfort. Only Satan celebrated uninterrupted, dancing between kibbutzim and the festival of slaughter. And our correspondent goes on to report, sobbing all the while, that there's a burnt baby, and an abducted baby. There's an orphaned baby, and a day-old baby, still linked by the umbilical cord to his mother, wasn't even able to learn his own name that will be inscribed on the tiny headstone with a single date for birth and death. This is what the kibbutz looks like after Satan's visit. Turning the broadcast back to the studio, quiet now, they're shooting. They're also launching rockets. There's no government, there's no mercy. Just the screaming in the images that will never leave the mind of the 7th of October, 2073. By the way, just reminds me here, the name of the book, Shiva, Shiva is a little play on words because Shiva is a Shiva we know, but a Shiva is also 7 for the 7th of October. So the poem begins with the opening lines of the word for the Kaddish. Even here, this was a translator's problem. We could have done this in English. Actually, and that would have given us a rhyme here. Magnified and sanctified is his great name, and no one came. We didn't. We went with the Hebrew. But even with the Hebrew, we could have said Yiskadal v'Yiskadash in an Ashkenazic transliteration. Those are the choices. This is what we came up with. Yitgadal v'Yitkadash shemei rabbah. So people are praying to God, and what happened? Nobody came. This again is a powerful indictment of God. Many thousands called to him on Shabbat morning. October 7th was a Shabbat morning. They were crying his name out loud, tearfully begging for him just to come. And then this is the gut punch here. But he had ceased from all his work. Avalu shavat mikol melachto. You know, we have vayishbot bayom hashvi'i mikol melachto asher asa. It was Saturday. God was taking the day off. You know, it's his day of rest. The Bible says that. So God just was not in the office. No God arrived. No God provided comfort. Only Satan celebrated uninterrupted, dancing between kibbutzim and the festival of slaughter. Again, here, by the way, that festival of slaughter in Hebrew is Misibat Tevach. Tevach sounds a lot like the word Teva. The Nova festival was a nature festival. That would be Misibat Teva. So the poet is turning the nature festival into a slaughter festival with just changing one letter in the Hebrew. And then our poet, who was a correspondent, goes into that mode, and the reporters were crying, seeing what they couldn't be objective here reporting this, what they saw. All of this situation, these little babies. And again, it just, you know, heartrending description here. And this is what the kibbutz looked like after Satan's visit. And then a report of what's going on. They're still shooting, launching rockets. There's no government. Ein memshalah. So again, this is not only was he, blaming God, he was blaming the government. The government didn't show up. There's a passage in Pirkei Avot that says that we're supposed to pray for the welfare of the government, because if there were no government, people would tear each other apart. And there was no government that day. The government failed. And there was no mercy. Certainly there was no mercy from the enemy side, but the things that are supposed to make the world an orderly place, government, mercy, just weren't there. All that was there was screaming and images that would never leave the mind on October 7th. Questions, comments? Okay. Oh, okay, Leslie. You'll have to unmute, please.
Sorry, I'm doing this outside my home on my phone, so it gets a little getting used to. I wanted to make some comments about the other poem I forgot. I was struck that I saw a headline from one of the English language Israeli papers questioning where God was on October 7th. I'm also struck by the fact that this poem translates God as a man, whereas I think if I was involved and I couldn't be, I don't know the Hebrew, I would have just left the name of God, as opposed to he or she. But in the first half of the poem, I was wondering if the he related to Bibi. And the second half of the poem says that there was no government.
Okay, so let me address your first question, which is, again, it's a challenge with Hebrew. So Hebrew is a gendered language, and so God's gender is dictated by the rules of language. God will come out as a male, but you're right. We probably could have changed that and said many thousands called to God on Shabbat morning, and that would have been an appropriate way with that challenge. But there are lots of places where we have a gendered language challenge that's created here. When he says there's no government, I suspect he meant everything from the prime minister to the intelligence to the security to the defense to every aspect of it. Alex. Alex, you had your hand up?
Oh,
No.
hand. I'm going to raise my hand.
Okay, Bonnie, go ahead.
Hi. So what you're describing here is this profound, all-encompassing feeling of abandonment. It's before the sense of betrayal really comes out. I'm assuming there are going to be some poems that I don't remember. I read them weeks ago when I first got the book, of the betrayal. And the betrayal keeps happening over and over. When things are exposed and revealed, like the female observers that were ignored, for example. So I'm waiting for that. I'm waiting to see something that where the grief of abandonment is even worse than what comes after. That's all I have to say. It's bothering me all the time.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be more on all of that. There already has been some of that, but I would say even this poem where he talks about no government, no mercy, and where was God is they're feeling betrayed. But you're right. As we learn more, there's new examples of that will come out. Ruth, you have your hand up?
Yeah, just an observation. I just read through the Hebrew, and the Hebrew rhymes. I know you said you didn't rhyme the English which I think was a great decision, but it's so beautiful reading it in the Hebrew with the rhyming stanzas.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, if you wanted this to rhyme, I could take this poem, put it into ChatGPT and say, make this rhyme, and they would make it rhyme. But a lot would be sacrificed.
No, no, I think you did the
Yeah.
right thing, but the rhyming is really lovely.
Anything else before we move on? Okay. This poem is called Prayer, and we'll discuss what the prayer is, and I'll just read it in English. And by the way, this poem, it's interesting too, because you're not sure what it's about until you get about midway into the poem, and then one word kind of reminds you what it's about. When you return, we'll sit, just the two of us in the shower. You and the gentle water, I facing you, will gently wash your hair, erase all your memories. We'll sing to you the song of the hyacinth and of the rain tickling the window. I'll carefully clean from between your toes every trace of the tunnels. I will tell you about the moon that shone so many nights when you weren't here. I'll wipe the tears off your face. The gentle water will wash them away. I will braid your hair, dress you in pajamas, just the two of us in bed, and a caring hug, hope, love, fear, and a prayer that there will never be a next time. Just one question here. I just noticed a little mistake in the translation, but we'll come to it. So this poem, first of all, this is a poem of presumably a mother with a child who's being held hostage. And that the mother is saying, not if you'll return, but when you'll return. This is what we're going to do. And it's a poem about cleansing and caring and gentle, loving care. And as I said, you're not sure what it's about. The memories have to be erased, but as soon as you get to that word tunnels, you know where this child was. The reference to the Song of the Hyacinth is a Leah Goldberg lullaby. I recently taught this poem to a group, and there were two women who grew up in Israel and said, "Oh yeah, we know that poem," and they sang it. So I don't know if anybody here knows the song, but it's a lullaby, and and you have rain tickling on the window, and you have the moon, and that's what the mother is going to sing to the child. And again, this is, at least when you first read this, I think you think of a small child, but this could be a child who's an adult. The poem's addressed to a female, but could be any child and could be any age. What I hesitated about there was, there's a line here, I'll wipe the tears off your face. Actually, that's I will wipe my tears off your face. If you look at the Hebrew, demotai, I don't know how that got lost here, but because that's not what it was supposed to be. What I talked about before about saying this is a prayer, the prayer at the very end you see is a prayer that there will never be a next time. So, I mean, you can almost say, well, technically the prayer is not that the child will come back. There was, yes, you will return. I know you'll return. What I'm praying for is that there'll never be a next time. Okay, comments, questions? Leslie.
I was surprised that it's a mother and child, because reading it in the English, I thought that it could have been an adult couple, whereas one of them was a hostage and the other wasn't. So I wondered does it come out in the Hebrew that it's a child? And
No,
thanks.
No, you're absolutely right. It could be anything. I think what sort of at least gave me the image of the a number of these images, I kind of pictured that, including the lullaby. But this could be any two people, absolutely. Rabbi Perkins.
Hi. First, Yasha Koch. These are incredibly powerful. With the two people, when I saw Rak Shteinu Bamita, that suggests a woman and another woman or
Yes.
a daughter. So that kind of, I also, as I was reading through the poem, had the sense it could be anyone and his or her lover. And I also felt there's a kind of a, almost a like not a surreal quality to this, but it, I wondered as I was reading it whether the person actually is alive in the tunnels or not, and is coming back or is not, and whether this is a prayer. It's a prayer. It's not a prediction, and it could cover so many different tragic circumstances.
You're absolutely right, and it should do that. And by the way, I'll just tell you through some strange quirk. In the book, when the book was published, I noticed that a couple of the references to the child or the other person were in the masculine. Instead of lach, it said lacha. And I was trying to figure out how did that happen, because the poet wrote it in the feminine. And somewhere at one point, we changed the font of the Hebrew. And in the course of that, it changed the vowel. And but again, seeing that this poem, I didn't think it was, so I corrected it here, but I think having it be in more than one gender is entirely appropriate for all of the reasons that you and the previous questioner raised. Yes. Deborah.
I also felt that being a prayer, that this could be a mother and child still being captive, and she's telling her that when we return, I will shower you. She's being soothing and trying to help her child go through this horrible time of being in the tunnels.
Thank you for that reading. I see we've got some other hands raised. I'm trying to see who they are. Hold on. Maybe somebody else can call.
Parrots can.
Parrots, yeah, go
Why
ahead.
don't you?
Okay, thanks. I'm struck. I'm going to take your observation about what we might think the prayer would be and carry it over the finish line, I think. This poem, I don't know how early on it was written, but it was some time back, is so much like the experience that we're all having now of watching the families of returned hostages, and returned in this, especially just in this last few weeks, each one appearing in public and saying, I'm not whole until everybody's back. I'm not, we might have expected after this long poem about the individual that the speaker in the poem is caring about, that there would be something very personal. But I read the last line as very generic. There won't be a next time that this event will happen, that this will happen to anyone, at least here in Israel. I'm struck by that. I'm struck by the move from the personal from the prat to the klal, from the individual to the group.
Thank you. Let me just see, are there any other hands up here? I don't see any. Actually, so, I'm happy you mentioned that, because our next poem is something that most of these poems are from the book, and the book actually went to press in, I don't know, June maybe. But I did include a poem that was written just a couple of weeks ago, and it's this poem right here. A beautiful poem that you'll understand. There are mothers who gave birth to their daughters twice. The first time they came from heaven, the second time from hell. just like back then, even today, they waited to hear the cry that says they're now able to breathe. So this is a reaction of those parents whose children were reunited just within the last couple of weeks, and just waiting to hear the cry. And when it talks about waiting to hear the cry, it says they're now able to breathe. It's both the child and the parent that are covered. The parent hasn't been able to breathe. Now the parent can breathe. Anyway, I just thought this was extremely powerful. Any other comments? Okay.
Just a question. How does one get that poem?
So this is a poem that Rachel Korazim saw published, I think, online. Some of these poems, I mean, if you want this poem, I can make available the PDF of everything we're doing today, which I'll do, because we're not going to finish the poems. And I don't know if Hebrew College can easily post a link to these, but if not, we can be sure that anybody that wants it or everybody who signed up will get a PDF of all of these poems.
Thank you.
This is an interesting poem. Also has a translation problem.
Mhm.
And says a crossword clue will say death camp. Someone will answer Auschwitz, but there are only 4 letters. Someone biting a pencil will say, turning it to erasing mode, searching for an answer. And a girl from Kibbutz Be'eri will say, I know, it was my home. So actually home has 4 letters in it, but I mean here Be'eri has 4 letters. So the person is saying the answer to the 4-letter clue death camp, this woman is saying could be Be'eri. This next poem was written by Avital Liman. Avital Liman is a kindergarten teacher. And on October 8th or 9th, realizing that so many children from the kibbutzim had been evacuated to hotels on the Dead Sea, and that these are children who sometimes don't have their parents with them. These are children who saw death, the death of their friends, of their siblings, of their parents, their grandparents, little children who really didn't understand death. This is the poem. In the evacuees hotel by the Dead Sea, she carefully gathers, I forgot to say that Avital Liman then went down to the Dead Sea to take care of children. In the evacuees hotel by the Dead Sea, she carefully gathers a doll's hair with a ribbon. She attaches a sparkling pipe cleaner to the ribbon, and then she asks, tell me, am I alive? And how would they know if I were dead? What would you say to a 4-year-old girl? Only the living can hug. Come, let's hug and see if we're alive. Later she says, tomorrow morning, let's check again. So we have this very wise teacher who is there seeing this little child, and the child doesn't really understand what's alive and what's dead and needs reassurance. And the teacher, wisely says, well, if you can hug, you're alive. So let's do it. But even the teacher, I think thought that they had solved the whole problem, but no, this child was going to need to check again the next day, trying to get a handle on what is this death and what's the future. Myrna, you're muted, Myrna. Please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Hi, I want to say for me, it's one of the most touching ones. The language is so spare and it's so visual, what a good poem does, so that we can see her gathering the doll's hair, something so tender and so actually what little girls do, right? A sparkling pipe cleaner to the ribbon. And the idea that a child would ask that question, because children ask brilliant questions that adults don't dare ask. And I think also the fact that there are quotes in the poem make it so powerful to me. And then the idea of tomorrow morning, let's check again. It's just so beautifully written and expressed. Thank you.
Thanks. This next poem is about Kibbutz Be'eri. And again, I'm just gonna, let me just unmute, well, I try to get my, you can't really see the cover of the book too well, but the cover of the book is the poppy fields right outside of Be'eri. And there is, people would go every, in our winter, I guess January, to that area to go admire these red fields. And they had what was called Darom Adom, the Red South. And it was just nature, beautiful, all of these red fields. And this poem talks about that after October 7th. Soon winter will be here. Weeping clouds will water the earth, making red carpets grow. The anemone will flower first, yet no one will come to admire its beauty. The buttercup will bloom next, but there will be no festival. The poppy is last to bloom. Silence. No one is there. The protected flowers had already been plucked in the fall. So, again, the clouds are weeping. The fields will be watered. The flowers will grow, but there's nobody to come to see. In fact, last year there was no Darom Adom Festival. I'm not sure they were trying to do something this year. I don't know. Maybe Parrots can tell us what they actually ended up doing. But the and then the and the poppy, by the way, the poppy has other resonance, not from Jewish sources, but there's the old poem about in Flanders fields the poppies blow, and that was a poem about
World War I.
World War I and soldiers being killed and cemeteries with flowers, and so there's an association with poppies and death. But here, and Rachel always tells us, she said when she was growing up in Israel, first the children would go and pick wildflowers all the time. And there was a concern that all the wildflowers be picked up. So there was a huge campaign with posters and everything saying, no, this is a picture of all the protected flowers. Don't pick these wildflowers. And the kids knew which ones they could pick and which they couldn't. Here, the reference to the protected flowers had already been plucked in the fall is clearly a reference to the people that died on October 7th. They can't be seen anymore. The protected flowers had been all picked in the fall. And the festival did not happen. So, Deborah, you have your hand up.
I was wondering about the protected flowers. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Israelis reading it would understand. The rest of us need some interpretation, some parshanut. Yes. And Alex.
I'm outside, so I hope it's not too loud. Michael, just following up on that point. The term fachim muganim, that's protected both in the sense of don't pick the flowers and in the sense of a shelter, of merchav mugan, like a secure place. So that's where people go when they're attacked.
That's right. And the protection didn't always work. You're absolutely right.
And of course, the verb for to pick is very close to the verb for to kidnap.
Yeah, nichtafu, niktafu. That's good. Good.
Michael,
Yes.
whoops, sorry about that. We have about 5 minutes left. But Peretz did write in the comments that this year's Darom Adom Festival ends on Friday, so it looks like it was held.
It's held. I guess it's being held, and obviously with a whole different attitude. So we're not going to be able to get through the rest of the poems here. Let me just give you a little guide to them so that if you get the PDF, you can sort of see them. This poem here, No Savior, is it's about a man returning back to his spouse, his partner, after being in the war. And the punchline, the double punchline for him, there's no one to save him, and then there's no one to save her. When I was in Israel, shortly after October 7th, I met with a group that basically was working with soldiers who going to Gaza and everything, this huge amount of PTSD. Some people say all of Israel has PTSD, but the soldiers come back with a lot of challenges, and it's very hard for them to reintegrate. We met with a group called Bishvil HaMachar, which means for tomorrow or on the path to tomorrow, that basically was all just working with trying to provide mental health treatment to soldiers who were having trouble coming back home. And you can see the challenge of the husband coming back. So I hope you have an opportunity to read that. This one, One Tiny Seed by Rachel Goldberg Bohnen. Rachel was a student of Rachel Korazim. Rachel gave us this poem to put in the book. This poem was written, as you can see, 60 days in, where she certainly had hope that her son would be returned. Because this book is on Amazon, and if you want it, you can all get it on Amazon. But for Israel, it's hard to get books on Amazon, so we printed a few hundred copies there to be able to get them to people in Israel. And Rachel Korazim said to me, she wants the first copy to go to Rachel. And sadly, the book came from the publisher right after we learned of Hirsch's death. And the book Shiva was delivered to Rachel at the Shiva. But it's a poem that shows Rachel's hope and optimism, which her hope continued after she got the bad news. But also, I hope you have an opportunity to read that. Here's another. This is a poem that's not in the book, but it's an interesting use of, I'll show you right down here. You can see it uses military wireless code. And it's about a wounded soldier. And the best line here, again, you talk about gut punches. The last line here is Biyadcha afkid ruchi. This is God saying. So, at Adon Olam, we say Biyado afkid ruchi. We give to God our soul. In this poem, God is saying, sorry, guys, I can't help you with this wounded soldier. Biyadcha afkid ruchi. God is saying, I'm turning over my ruach to you. And also powerful poem. And finally, there's a poem in here which is kind of a reverse take on the Akedah, which I think is self-explanatory, but basically has Ishmael holding the knife. So let me just end by saying that I really appreciated all of you taking the time to learn about these poems. I hope you have an opportunity to read these closer. And if you have an opportunity to get the book, to take a look at those poems. And I'm happy that for me, it was a great privilege to be involved in this project of translating these poems. And as I say, even over 500 days later, I think they still have their power. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michael, for
Thank you
guiding
very
us.
much.
Thank you for guiding us through this powerful session and these words. Everybody's reaction to what went on, or many people's reaction, is Ein Milim. There's
Can we take down the
Yep.
Here, I'm going to stop. Here we go.
Okay.
Thank you.
So many people's reaction to this horror is that Ein Milim, there's no words, and yet there's a lot of words. So thank you for sharing them. And thank you all for joining us today. As Michael said, the book is available for purchase via Amazon. Somebody else wrote that it's available at the Israel Bookstore in Brookline on Harvard Street. Please remember that the net proceeds for the purchase of this book support the Israel Trauma Coalition. Everybody will receive a follow-up email from today's event with the recording, and when we get the PDF from Michael, we'll attach that as well. You're all invited to, switching hands, topics now. Our next GROW event is scheduled for March 12th, which will feature Alicia Gechter, immediate past president of Mayim Chaim, speaking on giving shape and intentionality to ritual. So we invite you to participate as well. Tamid of Hebrew College Adult Learning has lots of new courses that are starting next week, next month, for the summer. We invite you to visit our website at Hebrew College and to check out the learning and keep learning with us. And thank you for being with us today. So, shalom.
תודה למכללה העברית.
Toda rabah.
Thank you. Yasher Koach, Michael.
Yeah,
Just
thank you. Thanks to
beautiful.
Hebrew College.
Beautiful job. Very touching.